Okay, so tonight's topic in the series of heroes and villains is Mordechai. And just to give the light and the darkness, the shade and the difference between, I'd like to speak a little bit about the disparity between Mordechai and Achashverosh. And to do it, what I'm going to do is go through the Purim story, but to try and highlight a character that drives the story and the narrative of the Megillah in a way I think that often gets overlooked. And we're going to start right at the beginning, which is usually a good place to start. I remember as a kid, we learned in school, and sometimes they would translate the words into Yiddish, because I went to an Ashkenaz school, and it was the only religious one near us. So I would come home and I'd speak Yiddish. And I remember that my rabbi he said, okay guys, fang offen Anfang. And I thought he was speaking Chinese, but apparently, fang offen Anfang means start from the beginning. So we're going to start from the beginning, le'atchil me'atchala, like we would say in Hebrew, right in the beginning of the Megillah. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, in the days of Achashverosh. Hu Achashverosh, hamolech me'odu ve'ad kusheva, ve'esrimu me'a medina. And this was Achashverosh, who ruled over 127 countries. Fantastic. And it was in these days, Bayamim ahem keshevet hamelech Achashverosh, as the king Achashverosh sits al kiseh malchuto, on the seat of his rulership, asher b'Shushan habira, which was in the capital city of Shushan. Now, the Vilna Gaon points out something unbelievable. And what he points out is that the order of placement here is incorrect. Now, I've noticed that Americans and English people, we do things quite differently, right? Sometimes in a nice way, sometimes in not such a nice way. You know, I found that there's very few areas that Americans are actually more classy than British people. They're very few. I've discovered that one place where we are more classy than you is when we describe the place where someone goes to fulfill their bodily needs. So in America, we're kind of use the more genteel, the nicer, word bathroom or restroom, and over here it's toilet. I'm going to the toilet. You know, I always found that shocking that English people would be like less genteel than we are. The other one I found as well is where you would park your car. In America, it's this beautiful word. It almost sounds like it's French. It's fantastic. It rolls off the tongue. It's garage, and here it's garage. It's quite an interesting thing.
Actually, say lavatory.
Lavatory, okay, there we go. Lavatory is a nicer word for it. So what I'd like to point out over here is something which I think is quite interesting, that the Vilna Gaon points out. Al kiseh malchuto. Achashverosh sits on his throne of glory, and the order is backwards. Now, there's a difference between, and I have experienced this numerous times, I will fill out something, and it will tell me that my information is incorrect. And it will tell me that the thing that I've got wrong is not the password. Sometimes you get password wrong, you know, it's 17 letters, it's a capital, it's a number, they made you put it in a character, etc. But sometimes, like, there are things that you shouldn't get wrong. Like, as an example, your birthday. You should know the day that you were born, right? And it keeps telling me that I'm wrong on my birthday. And why am I wrong on my birthday? Because I'm American. And Americans, how do we have the date in our birthdays? It goes month, day, year. That makes no sense, right? It should go day, month, year, or year, month, day, right? But not one and then the other and then the date in the middle. That doesn't make any sense. So the placement of something should be sequential, correct? And even though I'm a proud American, I will give you guys have won this one, okay? Says the Vilna Gaon, the order here is backwards. And Achashverosh is sitting al kiseh malchuto, on the throne of his glory, which is in the capital city of Shushan. So we describe all the countries he's king over, and that's the large number, the year. What should come next in the sequence? The city. And then what should come? The throne. But instead we go countries, throne, city, capital city. What's going on? Says the Vilna Gaon, an unbelievable thing. He sat on his throne, which was in the capital. Not he sat in the capital on his throne. Because Achashverosh wanted a magnificent throne, one that was a replica of the throne of King Solomon. had 15 different stairs, was made out of gold, had all these different ornamental elements on it, and they couldn't make it, so he had to go to a city outside of the capital city of Persia. He had to go to the city of the artisans, the city of Shushan. They finally built this giant, magnificent throne for him, and it was done. Only problem was, they couldn't move it. So he did what any self-respecting despot would do. He moved his capital city. Now, could you imagine this? Could you imagine this concept? Like, the new prime minister, please God, not Jeremy Corbyn, but the new prime minister decides, I love my house out in the country, I can't move it to London, so forget 10 Downing Street, it's going to be number 74 Partridge Street. Where is it? In Kent. Nobody would do this. But that's what Achashverosh has done. He's moved his throne, he's moved the capital city, so therefore says the Pasuk in the order in which it actually occurred. He sat on his throne of glory, which was in the city of Shushan, which is the capital city. Now. Reminds me of a joke. I remember my favorite comedian used to say, his name is Steve Wright. Most English comedian that I could ever find from America. Very deadpan, very sarcastic. He says, when I was young, my mother bought a sandbox, but she filled it with quicksand. I was an only child eventually. Now, you see, this is something, it becomes the capital city. But that sounds like a really random message to begin the Megillah with, doesn't it? It's almost as if that point is the focal point, the seminal point from which the Megillah must flow. So if I began and I told you there was once a king who was very short, you know that the story is going to follow that line. So too, in our story, in understanding Achashverosh and the two characters that are wrestling with one another. And it's interesting, you have Mordechai and Achashverosh, and you have Haman and Esther. Why those two are divided that way is maybe a topic for another night. But Mordechai and Achashverosh are grappling over one thing. And it's going to begin here. You see, when someone needs to sit on an ornamental throne of that nature, what do you know? Now, this is amazing. I remember there was this film called Shrek. And in the film, there's a king, and he's a short king. And they don't know this at this time. But then they find out that he's a short king because they can finally see him and he's really short. And then they see his castle and his castle is big. And Shrek turns to the donkey and says, do you think he's compensating? When you have a giant castle and you're a very small man, what do you think you're doing? It actually has a name, it's called small man syndrome. It requires the person to act in a way that he's very big because he feels very small. This is true not just about physical height, but people who don't have a sense of internal value always feel like they need to take it out on other people and tell everyone how big they are, how important they are, because they're not so sure of it themselves. And if they yell it loud enough, often enough, maybe someone will believe it. Achashverosh, we are taught right in the beginning of the story, he's so obsessed with the power, with the glory of this throne, that what do you know for sure? That the thing that Achashverosh is most conscious of is his relationship with the throne. Now watch how this plays out. Without Achashverosh in the Purim story, we don't have a Purim story. It was in these days when Achashverosh is sitting on this throne, which happens to be in some city that then became the capital city. On the third year, Lemocho, Asam Mishtei does a party for all Sarav, the officers, the Avadav, and the servants, the great people, the people of valor from Persia and Media, Hapartemim, Besarea, Medinot, everyone comes. Beharoto, as he shows off the vast wealth of his kingdom and the glory of his greatness. Yamim Rabim, for many days, 180 days, he's making a party to show people how rich and powerful he is. What do you know? You know that this is a man who doesn't feel either rich or powerful. Now watch what happens. And as these days come, and all the great and all the small are at his party, with the greatest and most lavish of party tricks, he calls for his wife. Now, there's something weird that is happening here. This party is, there probably wasn't a mechitza. I'm just going to go out on a limb here, right? It probably was a wild party set in the Middle Ages with everything that your imagination could provide but probably shouldn't, okay? And then we read the strangest verse, but we accept these things. It's quite an amazing thing that things that you read as a child, you just accept them. Rabbi Foreman used to talk about this. He called this the lullaby effect. That as a child, when you hear these things in lullabies, you never question them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Now, okay, so all the king's men are hanging around. They call the surgeon. He's like, scalpel. They try and fix Humpty Dumpty. And then they can't. So then the horses are like, give us a try. Like, why would the horses be able to put Humpty together again? But no one asks this, right? You know, you sing to your child, rock-a-bye baby on the treetop. When the wind blows a cradle, down will come baby cradle. And all you're trying to put the kid to sleep. And you're telling him how he fell out of a tree and why would you do? And then you got struck by a bus. Good night. See you in the morning. Don't have dreams of getting run over by a bus. Why would you do that? That's the lullaby effect. Did anyone ever ask? Beautiful. Gam Vashti HaMalka. Also, Vashti makes a party. Why? Bet HaMalchut Mishten Nashim, a party for the women. Bet HaMalchut Asher LaMelech Achashverosh. Now, I've been to weddings where there's mixed seating. Shh. I've been there. It exists. Even with some families that are from, it happens. I've been to weddings that have mechitzas. I've never been to a wedding where there was one party for the men and another party for the women. Why is Vashti so frum? Why is Achashverosh so frum? How come he's not invited the women? Isn't that something that you'd think someone like Achashverosh would want? Now, you kind of get a glimpse of what kind of a man Achashverosh is later on in the story, where he decides that he's going to choose a wife by sleeping with every possible available woman. So this is not a guy who is such a tzaddik that he's going to make separate parties. And the answer is, you have to understand what's really happening here. Achashverosh is so afraid, so conscious of his throne because he knows that he's not real royalty. Chazal tell us that Achashverosh was once a stable boy. He was a stable boy to the king. He becomes the king because he marries Vashti. Vashti comes from the bloodline direct of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar. This is the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, the king that ruled the entire area at the time, who was then superseded by the Persian kingdoms. So Achashverosh is aware of the fact that he's the king, but he's the king because he's married to the queen. He goes and throws a massive party to consolidate power. That's what Achashverosh is doing. But Vashti is on to him. She knows that he's trying to grab the power for himself. And she knows that the power really belongs to whom? Her. So as soon as she sees him putting out save the dates, as soon as she sees that he's putting on a mega party, what does Vashti do? She puts on a party. And who does she put on a party for? Only the women. Vashti's not such a tzaddiket either. How come she didn't invite men? What Vashti was trying to do is something which is prevalent in our society today. She was trying to say that if I'm a woman and I'm in this place, then I deserve that for myself. I stand on my own 2 feet. If he's the king because he's married to me, then the power is mine. Why and how does she throw that party? To illustrate that we have a place in this political scene. It's all moves. Do you get it? Watch how this plays out and you'll see that this story is all about Achashverosh's fragile ego. He calls his wife from her party. The soldiers come. And they say, your husband would like you to come. Lehavi et Vashti hamalka lefnei hamelech, to bring Vashti, the queen, in front of the king. Beketa machut, in the throne, in the crown, royal crown. Say Chazal, what do you mean in the royal crown? Only the royal crown. She was to come in front of everyone there in the royal crown, but without any clothes. Which king? I mean, in this country, there was a scandal because, someone took inappropriate pictures of someone in the royal family. They shut the newspaper down. When the queen walks the street, she doesn't go in a bathing suit. The modesty of the kingdom wouldn't allow it. Why would he parade his wife around like this? As if she was some sort of piece of meat in front of everybody else. Surely that's not something that is befitting his honor as the king, that everyone should be looking at his wife unclothed. It's crazy. But the point you have to understand is the game. Why is he trying to do it? Laharot ha'amim hasarim et yofya, to show everyone that the reason why I married her is not because she's royalty. I could be king without her. I married her because she's eye candy. She's a trophy wife. The humiliation that he would put on her would solidify the power of his position. So he calls her and says, with this crazy stunt, and he asks it to come, Ki tovat mar'ehi. The reason why I married her is because she's so beautiful. And she's unparalleled in the kingdom in her beauty. Vatima'en hamalka Vashti. Vashti does not want to come. She knows what's happening. But here's where it gets interesting. Achashverosh and Vashti clearly have shalom bayit issues. On so many levels, right? So many levels. They're not getting along, right? Now, I don't know, if I were you, if you and me were married and we had shalom bayis issues, I'd probably go, to the local shalom bayis authority, to the Jewish Marriage Council, speak to them a little bit, I get some advice, get some tips, figure out how, if we're fighting, my wife doesn't want to listen to me, I don't want to listen to her, sort that out. So his wife doesn't listen, and the Melech gets very angry. Vayomer HaMelech lechachamim yodei ha'itim. He calls the wise men, the knowers of the times. He calls a parliament meeting. He calls all of the great advisors, Karshina, Shitar, Admata, Tarshish, Merish, Marsanam, Memuchan, the 7, ministers of Paras, of Persia and Media, Yoshvi. Why is he calling this massive meeting with all? The answer is because this was a coup. And it failed. And his wife refused to come. Now I know what you're thinking. Why doesn't Achashverosh just kill her? That'll solve all his problems. Wouldn't it? Everyone says he's the king because of her. Just, off with her head. The problem wasn't that the guillotine hadn't been invented yet. He could have figured this out. He needs to call a royal meeting? What is this? And the answer, my friends, is beautiful. It's beautiful. I don't know if you've studied history, but you will know that there was a man whose name was Napoleon. Napoleon led a revolution. And I want you to tell me what happened after Napoleon led a revolution. Does anyone know? He led another one. Why? How? What happened? How did this happen? Because when they defeated the first revolution, what did they do with Napoleon? Did they kill him? What did they do? They exiled him. Does anyone know where they exiled him to? The island of Achashverosh. No, I'm joking. They exiled him to the Isle of Elba. Why? This guy just literally ran a revolution against you. Why didn't they kill him? Why did kings all throughout history exile the people Why why didn't they kill them? And the answer is, sorry? That is true. That is true. On one level, they become martyrs. But there's a more subtle point, even if they weren't worried about martyrdom. If I become the king because I killed the queen, or because I killed the other king, I'm not really a king of power. I just happened to shoot the guy. There's no one left. In the vacuum, I stepped in. If I can be king while the other king is alive, and he can do nothing to stop me, he's in prison on my authority, that is real power. So Achashverosh knows he can't kill Vashti. On the other hand, she's his wife. He also can't put her in prison. So what should he do? Can't kill her. Can't put her in prison. These women are so difficult. That's what it seems like, right? Rabotai, there's something amazing here. Enter into the story Haman. Now, when you see the story through this lens, you'll understand what Haman is saying. Haman comes in and Haman's like, no problems, kill her. And Achashverosh is like, yeah, I thought of that already, but I can't kill her. He's like, why? Because then it will seem like I'm not strong enough to stand up to her. I had to kill her in order to get around this problem. Haman says, don't worry, king. I got you sorted. And the king says, what's your name again? He's like, Memuchan. He's like, oh, I thought you were Haman. Okay, fine. Either way, he says, Memuchan, go ahead, give me the answer. You know what Memuchan says? Kill the queen. But also, you should put out a proclamation. Did you ever wonder about this? It's just like this random bit in the Megillah that doesn't really make sense until you see it. Vayomer Memuchan. Lo al hamelech levado avta Vashti. You know what your answer is? I can get you out of this pickle. You kill her, and then you issue a declaration and a proclamation to all the lands. And what proclamation is that? You tell every single person in this country that every woman should speak the language of her husband. What does that have to do with anything? Did you ever wonder this? I'm going to read it to you. It's very straight. The king called Vashti, she did not come. And from now on, everyone should know, right, that what happens, that women should give honor to their husbands, whether they are big or whether they are small. And every woman should speak in the language. What? What Haman did was brilliant, if not the height of misogyny. He said, tell everyone that actually, you know what's really going on? This is not a fight between me and my wife. This is a fight of the men versus the women. Women should not be allowed to reject their husband's will. Women should be forced to speak the language of their husbands. If women disobey their men, then they should get capital punishment. This is what Haman says. And by diverting attention away from his wife and him, between the king and the queen, between the power struggle that they have, he turns his power struggle into the power of all men. And every idiot man in the kingdom buys it. Vashti gets taken to the gallows and she's killed, and Achashverosh's position is stronger than ever. Remember, when someone is so doubtful of their own power, what they need more than anything else is someone that they feel they can really rely on. Because if you're unsure about something, you're always wondering when it's going to go. I find this sometimes when you work with couples who feel like their relationship is not so strong. Any tiny thing that the other one does that undermines the way that they feel, that they think that the other feels about them, they turn it into a Megillah and a half. It goes from Megillas Esther to Megillas Eichel. They're going crazy. What, she said this, she told my mother-in-law, I have no respect, right? It's not that you have no respect. You don't respect yourself. So you think that everything that is said is trying to undercut you. Haman is the guy that looked out for Achashverosh. So what happens immediately after he gives him this advice? Achar hadvarim ha'ele, what happens? He raises up Haman, and Haman becomes his chief advisor. Rabotai, I want to share with you that the rest of the story plays out almost like a script. Haman sees Mordechai. Mordechai is not willing to bow. And Haman says, look, if he's out, then I'm not going to punish him. I'm going to punish everyone from his family. Now watch what Haman says to Mordechai. What Haman says to the king. Haman walks into the king and effectively says, I really want to get rid of these people. Yeah? These people are not our people. They're different to us. They're spread out everywhere. The decrees of the king, they don't listen to. And I want to read you specifically what he says, because it's so interesting to notice how Haman convinces Achashverosh in 1 second to just get rid of all the Jews. There's this one nation, mifuzar miforad ben amim, spread out amongst all the people. Bechol medinot malchutecha, across all the kingdoms of all the countries of your kingdom. V'datehem shanot, and they have different rules. They have different religion. Mikol am, from every nation. V'edateh hamelech, and the rules of the king en amosim, they do not listen. V'lamelech en shovel lahanicham. You don't understand. Having people that don't listen to the rules of the king because they have someone greater than you? You hear that? There's someone more powerful than you that they are listening to. And I'm going to pay 10,000. Achashverosh has heard enough. He's like, forget the money, mate. Here's my ring. Do you ever notice that? What? Just take the money. What? He's giving you the money. No. You're doing me a favor. What? He said the key words. They don't listen to you. They listen to a higher power than you. Achashverosh sees red. He writes off the whole of the Jewish people on that one sentence. They will be destroyed. And the king takes off his ring and he gives it to him. And the fate of the Jewish people was sealed. But ladies and gentlemen, if the story of Purim can only take place because Achashverosh is this type of person, then the continuation of the story and the playing out of the miracle of Purim also happens based on this person's character. Because what is fascinating to note is how the story flips on its head. He marries Esther. There's the whole story with the dream. Mordechai doesn't take anything for the fact that he saved the king's life. And one night, Balayla hahu, nadeda shenat hamelech, the king cannot fall asleep. Chazal tell us that the reason why the king cannot fall asleep is for one reason. What's he dreaming about? He's dreaming that Haman, who has now become so wealthy and so powerful with so many children, what does that say to someone like Achashverosh? Danger. He's his best friend. He's his most trusted advisor. He's someone who, on his word, he will wipe out an entire people. But he's got too powerful. And Achashverosh can't sleep. And he's having this dream, and all of a sudden, he asks them, you know what? Let me fall back asleep. Get me my book with all of the memories. Read me a bedtime story. And they start telling him the story of that there was once a plot to assassinate the king, and who saved the king was Mordechai. And Achashverosh is like, wait a second, Mordechai from the Jewish people? The one that Haman said is a danger to me, they don't listen to me, they have a higher, but he saved me, and what was his reward? And they read him from the book, the royal book of memories, that Mordechai refused to take a reward. What does that say when someone saves your life and refuses to take a reward? That they have loyalty, the most precious commodity, to someone like Achashverosh. And then he hears that Haman is standing outside. This guy who he was dreaming just now is usurping his throne, who's taking everything from him. He's going to do everything that... He invites Haman in, and now Achashverosh is already a bit He's unsure. So he decides to devise a test. And he says to Haman, there's this guy, doesn't say who. There's this guy who was really loyal to me and he saved me, I did all these great things. What should I do if I want to honor him? Haman thinks, who could the king want to honor more than me? And Haman says, the exact things that send Achashverosh into a tizzy. He doesn't say $1 million. No problem, he would have given him that. He says, the thing that you should give this person is you should give him the royal clothes, dress him up in the royal clothes, and put him on the royal horse. And you should have in front of the horse, who should run in front of the horse? One of the king's great ministers should run and say, such shall be done to the man the king wishes to honor. The royal clothes, the royal horse, and take a minister and have him run. Achashverosh turns to Haman and says, you do it. It's Mordechai. You do it. Now, Haman is very important. You don't take the most important man in your kingdom and have him running in front of a horse. Achashverosh specifically wants to do this. Do you understand? He's specifically worried about this. So he wants to take Haman down a couple notches. So he makes him do this humiliating thing specifically to a man who was once very loyal to him. This is the beginning of the end. Because as the story progresses, and he then sees Haman fall on Esther, it is a replay of everything that begins his own story. What made Achashverosh the king in the beginning? The fact that he was with the queen. And here's Haman, who he thinks is usurping his throne. He comes back in the second party, and at that moment, Haman is fallen on. Hagam lichvosh et hamalka. You're going to take the queen with me in the house? You're trying to do what I did? But what's fascinating here is the fact that Mordechai understands all of this. Right in the beginning of the story, we hear, Ein Esther magedet moladeta. Esther does not say who she is, what family she comes from, because Mordechai told her not to say. Now, when Mordechai told Esther not to say where she was from, had the decree happened yet against the Jews? It hadn't. Why doesn't he tell her? You know what? If you're going to get taken to the king anyway, at the very least, let him know that you're Jewish. There's a legend in Poland that the king of Poland had a Jew, whether it was a mistress or a wife, and her name, by the way, was Esther. This is in Polish lore. There's a hotel called Hotel Esther right in the in the square of Krakow, because that was the king, that was the city of where the king lived. All right, in Kazimierz, King Kazimierz the Great. The legend has it that he first had a tunnel to go meet her whenever he would want to be with her, and her name was Esther. Whether it's true or not is not really relevant, but there are those that said all this time that the reason why the king welcomed the Jews is because his wife or his girlfriend was Jewish. If he's going to steal her anyway, at the very least the Jewish people can get a little bit of relief from the fact that the king's going to kill them. No, don't say anything. Why does he tell her not to say anything? Mordechai understands Achashverosh 100%, because he is his opposite. Achashverosh is a megalomaniac. Achashverosh needs his position. He needs to be recognized all the time by everybody. But the funniest thing, Rabotai, is this. Why does Achashverosh kill Vashti? Because she is royal, and he is not. Mordechai knew that if he found out that Esther came from the Jewish people, that she was a direct descendant of King Shaul, then he once again would be married to royalty. And it would only be a matter of time before he would start imagining that she thought that she was better, more important than him. And he'd kill her too. So he makes Esther promise not to say who she is. It's funny how everything about Esther has to be hidden, and that is her name, Esther. Where do we find Mordechai being the opposite of Achashverosh? In the end of the Megillah, we read a very strange pasuk. The pasuk says that Mordechai got bigger and bigger and more famous and more famous. And you know what? I mean, this is like, I've always read this like a little bit as a Jewish thing. Ki Mordechai ha-Yehudi, Mishneh lemelech Achashverosh, he's like top in the government. V'gadol ha-Yehudim, he's like the most, important person for the Jewish people. V'ratzui, and you know how many people love him? Most of the people. I promise, I'm not making this up. V'ratzui lirov echav. And most of the Jews think he's a top quality bloke. The other half are like, meh. It's so strange. Well, I say Chazal, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that some people didn't like him. It means that the Sanhedrin, that some of the Rabbanim, they felt that he was going on a different path. But Mordechai didn't care. From the beginning, when all of the Rabbanim told the Jewish people at the time to go to the party of Achashverosh because it was Pikuach Nefesh, Mordechai was the only one who said, do not go. I don't care. At any cost, you cannot be there. Whereas someone who needs to feel empowered because they feel weak rallies everyone around them. They surround themselves with yes men. The people who are confident in themselves, who know what they have to offer, don't feel that way. So if you will, the Nes of Purim is the juxtaposition of characters. It's the man, the Mordechai, who at the time doesn't feel like he needs to claim a reward. He doesn't need to pull something out. He's happy with what he's done. And if something will happen later, something will happen later. That is the power of someone who has an internal, healthy sense of self. But I'd like to end with a little bit of a story. There's an unbelievable story about two boys, I think, who were running away from the Nazis towards the end of the war. Today it's in the news where the Polish people are talking all the time about how they're going to forbid anyone from saying that the Poles did anything during the war. I don't know if you've read about it in the news. And there were Poles that killed Jews. I know there's nothing to say. No two other ways about it. In Jedwabne, in Kelts, they murdered Jews. The city, the people in the city murdered their Jews. In Jedwabne, they burned all the Jews in a barn. In Kelts, after the war, when they came back, they murdered 37 Jews on the front porches of their own homes when they came back after surviving the war. The Poles wanted to say that it wasn't institutional. And on that level, there's actually some truth in what they're saying. But whether or not they did or didn't, our story follows a Polish farmer who was one of the good guys. And when two skinny, emaciated boys knock on his door and beg to be taken in, he has pity on them, even though the punishment for that is that they would kill you and kill your whole family. In Poland, the punishment for helping a Jew was incredibly severe, worse than in any other place under Nazi occupation. You could be killed for giving a Jew a cup of water, and not only you, your whole family. But he feels their pain, and he takes them to the back of his house in a barn, and he hides them along amongst his animals. Every day, he sneaks a little bit of food in by putting it together with the food for the animals, and that way no one will see that he's taking food anywhere, because as he walks with food in for the animals, he adds a little bit more of grain or whatever it was for these young boys. And so they survive week after week, and time drags on, and they're trying to ride out this war. One week, one of the boys turns to the other and he says, I've made my calculations, and I'm absolutely certain that this coming week is Pesach. And here we are sitting in this barn, eating this food. Maybe if we ask the farmer, instead of giving us a little bit of slice of bread, maybe he could save us the flour that he was going to use to make bread, and we could actually bake it into matzos. The idea becomes something that they hold on to with all of their lives, with everything that they have. Yeah? They decide that this is what they're going to do, and nothing can stop them. The farmer walks in, and they say, please, please don't, nothing extra, but any flour you're going to use, please save it up for us. At the end of this week, we have this holiday we want to bake. And he does, and they're okay. And they make these, they go to the oven and they bake 2 matzahs for the 2 of them. Could you imagine what that must have been like? And they're preparing, getting ready for the Seder in such horrible conditions. The day of the Seder is almost upon them. And one of the boys turns to his friend and he says, I just realized we have matzah. Obviously we have, we have the vegetables that we could use for maror. He says, but we have no wine. There's nowhere to get wine during the war in this area. The farmer doesn't have it. There's no way we can procure it. And the whole of the Seder is built around the cups of wine that you have. How do you make a Seder if you don't have wine for the Arba Kosot? Which bits do you say? Which bits do you omit? Which parts are connected to the bracha? Which parts they had no idea. They were little boys. They knew the Seder as well as they could, but they didn't know which parts they should, which parts they shouldn't say. And just the fact that they had such confusion on a night that would have been led by their father in a different time, in a different world, it brought them to such despair again. Instead of entering the Seder with a feeling of accomplishment, they entered the Seder with a feeling of such profound sorrow. But more than sorrow, they felt incredibly alone. Like they had no one in the world. Like no one cared. And then there's a knock at the door of the barn. The door opens, and standing in the doorway is not the farmer, but his son. And he's holding a piece of paper, and he walks up to them, and he says, I found this blowing around in the wind outside, and I thought it was garbage, but then I noticed that it has Hebrew letters on it. So I thought maybe if I brought it to you, you would know what it says. And the boy takes this piece of paper from this non-Jewish farmer's son, and he begins to cry uncontrollable tears, but joy, tears of joy. Because the page, the single page that this boy had brought them, was one page from the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. And the one page that he had found blowing around in the wind was the siman, the chapter that deals with the question of how you run a Seder if you don't have any wine for the Kiddush. Suddenly they didn't feel so alone. If you know how big the Shulchan Aruch is, I'll show it to you afterwards. You'll know the infinitesimal likelihood of that happening. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to draw your attention to one point. The miracle is not just that that page enters or is sitting in their hands on the night of the Seder when that was their question. For me, the more powerful thing to think about is the journey that this piece of paper must have taken. When the Nazis walked into some Bet Midrash or synagogue and tore the books off the shelves and shot the place up and ripped the pages out and left the place feeling like conquerors, as if they destroyed the Torah and destroyed God. And then a little gust of wind blows in the window of the shul, and a piece of paper starts to float back and forth. It gets kicked one way by a horse, another way by a passerby. It goes through the streets out to the area of the country with a mission. Do you understand what needs to take place? Not in the end of the story, but in every single step to get it from point A to point Z. We look at the Megillah and we read the beginning of the Megillah and it's quite sad. Until it gets to this second part, which is quite happy. Oh, here's the good part, guys. Okay, everyone wake up. This is when the Jews get back on top. Okay, fantastic. Carry on, Chazan. Do you know when the miracle of Purim started? Not when Achashverosh realizes that Mordechai was the one that saved him. Not when Esther becomes the queen. But when a boy with such a fragile ego falls in love with a princess. The miracle of Purim happens before the Megillah of Esther even starts. When it was this guy and not some other royal prince that marries her, who would have been confident enough to not have to throw a party, to not lose his wife at the gallows with a story of men versus women, to not get sucked in by a Haman, to not have all the challenges where he takes his most powerful person and winds him up on the gallows. In every single moment of your life which is difficult, remember this. You are not at the beginning of your story. You're part of the way through it. And the thing that you need in order to get out of it has already happened. And the chain of events that will get you to where you need to go, that will bring you the person that you need to marry, or the doctor that will help you have children, or the person that will give you advice as to how to raise your children, that's already been set in motion. And sometimes when we pray and we think, oh, that hasn't happened yet. Sometimes I tell someone asks me, they've been praying to get married for so long. I said, well, what do you think? Do you think when you go 3 steps back, you're going to go, Oseh Shalom, and she's going to be standing there? But every prayer, it doesn't make it happen. That first prayer, you know what happens? Your friend's third cousin goes to camp with the same girl. And then 6 years after that, they wind up having a reunion. And they're talking about it, and it reminds them of a story. And then you understand the process is the miracle. When you're Achashverosh, you need your results right now because you live in perpetual fear. But when you're Mordechai, you don't need to take immediate rewards. And you're ready and willing and trusting enough to allow Hashem's plan to develop and come to fruition in your life. May Hashem bless us all with the miracles that we seek. May Hashem bless us with the patience to be able to get what it is that we want. And may Hashem speed along the miracles that we wish for so that they can come and brighten our lives as soon as they possibly can. I wish you a wonderful Chag Purim Sameach, as they say.